The alarm did not sound like an alarm. It sounded like the sky itself had cracked open. I was standing in the kitchen of our small house on the outpost, holding a cup of something warm, when every light in the building turned red at once. My husband, Daniel, was sitting at the table, eating breakfast like it was any other morning. Then his spoon stopped moving. His eyes lifted toward the ceiling, toward the sound, and something in his face changed so completely that for one strange second I did not recognize him. I am Veithra, once a princess of the Solari Dominion, now a woman living on a quiet human research outpost at the far edge of nowhere. I did not choose this life. It was chosen for me, as punishment, as exile, as a joke my own family played on me by marrying me to a human they called ordinary. For 2 years, I believed them. I was wrong. Let me start from the beginning, because you need to understand how far this man had fallen from my expectations, and how far I still had to climb before I understood who he truly was. When my father's court decided I had embarrassed the family one too many times, they did not send me to a prison, though a prison might have been kinder. They sent me here, to a joint outpost shared between my people and the humans, and they married me to a man named Daniel Cole. He was, according to the official records, a simple liaison technician, a person who fixed communication systems and filled out paperwork, a person so unremarkable that even his own government barely noticed he existed. I remember the first time I saw him. He was standing at the docking bay, holding a small sign with my name written on it in careful letters, as if I might not recognize my own name if it were written poorly. He was tall, but not impressively so. He had brown hair that never seemed to sit the same way twice, and eyes the color of weak tea. He smiled at me, a small and polite smile, and said, "Welcome. I hope the trip wasn't too rough." I did not answer him. I walked past him toward the transport vehicle, already composing the letter I would send to my father, describing exactly how much I hated this arrangement. Over the following months, I built a full picture of the man I had been forced to marry, and every piece of that picture said the same thing: ordinary. Daniel woke early and made tea that tasted like boiled leaves. He kept a small garden behind our house, growing vegetables that he was inexplicably proud of. He watched old recordings from Earth, black and white films about detectives and cowboys, and he laughed at jokes that were not funny. He was polite to everyone on the outpost, remembered the names of their children, and never raised his voice, not even once. I used to sit across from him at dinner and wonder how my father could have chosen such a plain, forgettable man to punish me with. It felt almost insulting. A princess of the Solari Dominion, married to a man who spent his weekends fixing a fence that did not need fixing. But there were small things. Things I noticed and then dismissed, because they did not fit the picture I had already decided was true. Daniel never sat with his back to a door. In any room, in any building, he would quietly choose the seat that let him see the entrance, and he did it so smoothly that I almost never caught him doing it on purpose. When a supply drone malfunctioned near our house and began sparking wildly, spinning in the air with a loud, grinding whine, the outpost workers scattered and called for the safety team. Daniel walked toward it, calm as still water, and with 2 quick movements, he pulled a small panel free and the drone dropped lifeless to the ground. He did this so fast that most people did not even realize what had happened until it was already over. When I asked him about it, he shrugged and said, "I used to fix machines like that. Old habit." There was also the matter of sound. Loud noises did something to him that I could not explain. Once, a large piece of equipment fell in the storage building nearby, and the crash echoed across the outpost. I turned toward the sound out of simple curiosity. Daniel was already on his feet, already moving toward the door, his whole body tense in a way I had never seen from him before. It lasted only a moment. Then he exhaled, sat back down, and picked up his tea as if nothing had happened. "You are very jumpy for someone who fixes paperwork," I told him one evening, only half joking. He looked at me for a long moment, longer than the question deserved, and then he smiled that same small, polite smile. "Old habits," he said again. It was becoming his favorite answer, and I was beginning to notice that it never actually explained anything. I told myself, these were strange quirks, nothing more. A person can be careful without being dangerous. A person can react quickly to a loud noise without being a mystery. I had grown up around soldiers and guards my entire life, men and women trained since childhood to move like weapons, and Daniel did not move like them. He moved like a man who was trying very hard not to move like them, which is a very different thing, though I did not understand the difference yet. Our marriage was not warm, not in those first months. I resented being here. I resented him, simply for existing as the symbol of my punishment. I would speak to him only when necessary, and he never pushed me to be anything other than what I was. He gave me space, cooked meals I barely touched, and asked nothing of me except that I try to be, in his words, not miserable if you can manage it. Slowly, without either of us planning it, something shifted. I began to notice the way he listened when I spoke, really listened, the way he remembered small details about my home world that I mentioned only once. I began to notice that his garden, silly as it seemed, was the only place on this entire outpost where he looked completely at peace. I began to notice that his hands, when he worked with tools, were steady in a way that felt practiced rather than natural, as if steadiness were something he had built inside himself rather than something he was simply born with. I still believed he was ordinary. I had simply started to think that ordinary, in his case, might not be such a terrible thing. That morning, the morning the sky cracked open, started like any other. I made a warm drink in the kitchen. Daniel sat at the table in his plain gray shirt, eating a breakfast that he had, as always, slightly overcooked. Outside our window, the outpost stretched out under its usual pale sky, quiet and unremarkable, exactly the kind of place my father had chosen, because nothing important ever happened here. Then the alarm began. It was not the alarm we used for storms or equipment failures. This one was sharper, higher, a sound reserved for only one kind of event, an unscheduled ship, dropping out of faster-than-light travel directly above the outpost, close enough that our sensors barely had time to register it before it arrived. I stood up so fast that my cup fell and shattered against the floor. I looked toward the window, toward the sky, expecting to see nothing, because ships did not simply appear like that without warning, without registration, without the long, slow approach that every civilian vessel was required to make. But there it was, a shape cutting through the clouds, low and fast, moving with a precision that told me immediately this was not a mistake, not an accident, not some lost trader who had made an error in navigation. I turned to say something to Daniel, some question about what we should do, who we should contact, whether the outpost's small defense team would be enough. He was not eating anymore. His spoon lay forgotten on the table. He was staring upward, toward the sound, and his face had gone through a transformation so total that I felt a chill move through me even before I understood why. The polite, gentle, slightly awkward man who burned toast and grew vegetables and laughed at old jokes was gone. In his place sat someone else entirely, someone with eyes that had gone flat and focused, someone whose body had settled into a stillness that felt less like calm and more like a held breath before a storm. "Daniel," I said, my voice smaller than I wanted it to be. "What is that?" He did not answer right away. He rose from the table slowly, deliberately, and walked to the window. He watched the shape in the sky for several seconds, his jaw tightening with each passing moment, as if he were counting something only he could see. Then he said 4 words that I would remember for the rest of my life, 4 words that shattered everything I thought I understood about the man I had married. They found me again. I opened my mouth to ask what he meant, who they were, what he was talking about, but before I could speak, the entire house shook with the force of something landing hard on the ground outside, and the calm, quiet life I had spent 2 years dismissing as boring disappeared in an instant, replaced by something I did not yet have a name for, but would soon learn to fear and respect in equal measure. Daniel turned to look at me, and for the first time since I had known him, His eyes held no trace of the gentle, ordinary man I thought I had married. "Stay behind me," he said, his voice quiet and steady, in a way that somehow frightened me more than shouting would have. "And whatever you see in the next few minutes, do not be afraid. It is still me." I did not understand what he meant. Not yet. But I would. The front door did not open. It came off its frame, thrown aside like it weighed nothing, and 3 figures stepped through the opening it left behind. They wore dark gray armor with no markings, no insignia, nothing that could tell me who sent them or why. What I noticed first, though, was that they were human. Not Solari, not any of the other species I had grown used to seeing on the outpost. Human, like Daniel, and somehow that fact frightened me more than if they had been strangers from a world I had never heard of. "Cole," the one in front said, his voice flat and cold, like a man reading a name off a list rather than speaking to a person. "You look well for a dead man." Daniel did not move. He stood between me and the door, his body angled slightly, and I realized, with a strange, distant clarity, that he had positioned himself so that any attack would have to pass through him before it reached me. "You have the wrong house," Daniel said. His voice was calm, almost bored, but I could hear something underneath it now, something tight and coiled, like a spring pressed down as far as it would go. The man in front smiled, and it was not a kind smile. "No, I don't think we do." Everything after that happened faster than I could fully understand, even now, even after replaying it in my mind 100 times since. Daniel moved before the intruders finished raising their weapons. He crossed the space between us and them in what felt like a single motion, and the man closest to the door was on the ground before I had even registered that Daniel had touched him. It was not violent in the way I expected violence to look. There was no wasted movement, no anger, nothing that looked like fighting the way I had seen fighting before. It looked more like a kind of terrible practiced dance, each motion flowing directly into the next with no hesitation at all. The second intruder raised a weapon toward Daniel's back. I do not remember deciding to move, but I found myself grabbing the nearest object, a heavy metal pot from the kitchen, and throwing it as hard as I could. It struck the intruder's arm and threw off his aim just enough. Daniel spun, caught the weapon, and in one motion had it turned and disabled before the man could react. The third one ran. For a moment, the house was silent except for our breathing. Daniel stood in the middle of the room, chest rising and falling steadily, looking down at the 2 men on the floor with an expression I had never seen on him before. Not anger, not fear, something closer to sadness, buried deep beneath years of practice at hiding it. "Daniel," I said, my voice shaking now that the moment had passed. "Who are you?" He looked at me, and for a long moment he said nothing at all. Then, from outside, more shapes began to move across the open ground toward our house, at least a dozen of them, moving with the same disciplined precision as the first 3. "There's no time," he said. "I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" I did not answer immediately, because the truth was, I did not know. 2 years of marriage, and I realized in that moment that I did not know this man at all. But there was no time for doubt, no time for questions, because the world outside our small, quiet house had turned into something loud and dangerous, and the only person standing between me and it was a man I had once dismissed as ordinary. "Yes," I said, because it was the only answer that made sense. "I trust you." Something in his face eased, just slightly, and then he was moving again, pulling me toward the back of the house, toward a door I had never paid much attention to before, hidden behind a shelf of old books he claimed to have brought from Earth. "What is that?" I asked as he pulled the shelf aside, revealing a hatch built into the floor. "A door I hoped I would never need to use," he said, and there was real regret in his voice. He guided me down into a narrow passage beneath our house, one that connected to a maintenance tunnel running under the outpost. As we moved, I could hear the sounds of the intruders searching the house above us, their voices sharp and urgent. "They're calling you Cole," I said quietly as we walked. "But that's your name. Why does it sound like an accusation when they say it? Daniel was quiet for a moment before he answered. Because it used to mean something different, something I tried very hard to leave behind. What did it mean? He stopped walking and turned to face me in the dim light of the tunnel. There was a war, a long time ago, between my people and yours. You would have been very young, maybe not even born yet. It ended before most people your age even knew it had started. I was part of a unit that fought in that war, a very specific kind of unit. What kind? The kind that doesn't officially exist, he said. The kind that gets sent in to end things quickly, quietly, before they become worse. We had a name, once. The Reclamation Corps. Most people who know that name think everyone who served in it is dead. I stared at him, trying to fit this information into the picture I had built of him over 2 years, and finding that it did not fit at all. It broke the picture entirely and demanded a new one. You told me you were a technician, I said. You told me you fixed communication systems. I did fix communication systems, he said. After. That part was true. I just left out everything that came before it. There was no time to be angry, though I could feel the anger building somewhere beneath the fear and confusion. Above us, I heard a loud crash, and Daniel's head snapped upward, tracking the sound with the same sharp focus I had seen in him only once before, this morning, when the ship first appeared. "They've found the hatch," he said. "We need to move faster." We ran through the tunnel, the sound of pursuit growing louder behind us. I asked him more questions as we moved, unable to stop myself even with danger so close. Why are they here? Why now, after all this time? Because of something that happened at the end of the war, Daniel said, his breathing steady despite our pace. A steadiness I now understood was not natural but built through years of training I had never known about. There was an operation, a group planning something terrible, something that would have killed thousands of people on both sides of the war just to prolong the fighting. My unit stopped it, but stopping it meant some people lost everything they had built, everything they had planned for. Some of them survived. Some of them have spent years since then looking for the people who took that from them. And you are one of those people. I was the one who led that operation, he said quietly. I'm the reason it failed. We reached the end of the tunnel, where it opened into a maintenance room near the edge of the outpost's main structure. Daniel paused, checking the space carefully before allowing me to step through behind him. Why did you never tell me any of this? I asked, unable to keep the hurt out of my voice, even now, even with danger pressing so close behind us. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw something almost desperate in his expression. Because I wanted you to know a man who wasn't defined by what he did in a war he never wanted to fight. I wanted you to know someone quiet, someone safe. I know that wasn't fair to you. I know I should have told you the truth, but every time I thought about it, I imagined you looking at me the way you're looking at me right now, and I couldn't make myself say the words. There was no time to respond to that, because the sound of footsteps echoed through the tunnel behind us, closer now, and Daniel's expression shifted back into that focused stillness I had seen twice before. We need to reach the main security center, he said. If I can get access to the outpost's communication array, I can call for real support, something bigger than what these people are prepared to fight against. And if we can't reach it? He met my eyes, and for a moment, the gentle husband I thought I knew and the dangerous stranger I was only beginning to understand seemed to exist in the very same person, standing in front of me, unwilling to let either version disappear completely. Then I do what I used to do, he said. And I hope you can forgive me for it later. Outside, the sound of more ships arriving echoed across the outpost, and I realized, with a growing sense of dread, that whoever these people were, they had not come with a small team expecting an easy fight. They had come prepared for the very man they knew Daniel used to be, and I was only now beginning to understand exactly how dangerous that man had once been, and how much of him might still remain beneath the quiet life he had built for us both. Veithra, Daniel said, pulling my attention back to him. Whatever happens next, whatever you see me do, I need you to remember something. Everything I've built here, the garden, the mornings with bad tea, the quiet life you thought was boring, all of it was real. That part of me was never a lie. This is the part I was hiding, not the other way around. I did not have an answer for him, not yet, because the sound of footsteps in the tunnel had grown too close for words, and the door ahead of us was the only path left open. We reached the security center through a side corridor that Daniel seemed to know without hesitation, as if he had studied this outpost long before we ever moved into our small house near its edge. The room was empty except for a single technician, a young woman named Clara, who worked the overnight monitoring shifts. She looked up as we burst through the door, her eyes wide with a fear that told me the alarms had already reached every corner of this place. "Daniel," she said, relief and confusion mixing in her voice. "What is happening?" "The perimeter sensors are showing at least 3 landed ships, and I can't reach anyone on the response team." "They've likely been disabled," Daniel said, moving quickly to the main console. "I need access to the long-range array. Now, if you can give it to me." Clara did not question him. She simply moved aside and let him take the console, and something about the way she trusted him so completely told me that whatever Daniel truly was, this was not the first time he had shown a piece of it to someone on this outpost. While he worked, fingers moving across the controls with a speed and confidence I had never seen from him during the 2 years I thought I knew him fully, I found myself turning to Clara. "Do you know who he really is?" I asked quietly. She glanced at me, then at Daniel, then back at me. "Not everything, but I've seen enough over the years to know he's not just a technician. Once, a supply ship nearly collided with the outpost during a storm, and he was the only one who managed to calm the pilot down over the radio and guide them in safely, using words and codes that none of the rest of us recognized. I asked him about it afterward. He told me it was old training. He never said more than that, and I never pushed. Some people, you learn not to push." Daniel spoke without turning from the console. "The array is locked. Someone accessed the system before we arrived and shut down the outgoing signal path." "Someone on the outpost?" I asked. "Someone who knew exactly which systems to target," he said, his voice grim. "This wasn't a random attack. Someone told them where to look, what to disable, and when we would be at our most vulnerable." The weight of that statement settled over the room. If someone within the outpost, or within the wider network connected to it, had provided information to these attackers, then the danger reached far beyond the 3 ships sitting outside. It meant there was a betrayal buried somewhere close, someone whose face I might have seen at dinner, or passed in the hallway without ever suspecting what they carried inside them. "Can you fix it?" Clara asked. "Given enough time, yes," Daniel said. "But time is exactly what we don't have." As if summoned by his words, the door at the far end of the room shuddered under a heavy impact. Daniel's head snapped toward the sound, and in an instant, the careful, focused stillness returned to his face. "Clara, is there another way out of this room?" he asked. "Through the ventilation access, but it only leads to the storage wing," she said. "That will have to be enough. Take Vaithra and go. I'll hold them here as long as I can." "No," I said, the word leaving me before I had even fully decided to speak it. "I am not leaving you here alone." Daniel turned to look at me, and for a moment, the urgency in his expression softened into something gentler, something closer to the man I had spent 2 years learning to care for despite myself. "I need you safe," he said. "That matters more to me than anything else happening in this room. And I need you to stop deciding what I can and cannot survive," I said, surprising myself with the steadiness in my own voice. "I grew up in a court full of people who wanted to use me as a tool or a trophy. I have survived worse than this. Do not treat me like glass now, not after everything you have just told me about yourself." Something shifted in his expression, a kind of respect I had not seen from him before, mixed with worry that refused to fully disappear. "Then stay close, and do exactly as I say." The door gave way a moment later, and 2 more figures in dark gray armor stepped through, weapons already raised. Daniel moved to meet them, and once again I watched him fight with that strange, terrible grace, each motion economical, nothing wasted, nothing hesitant. It was clear now that this had once been his entire life, that somewhere beneath the gentle husband who tended a garden and burned toast, there existed a version of him shaped entirely by conflict and survival. I did what I could to help, staying low, using anything within reach to create small distractions, small openings that Daniel used without needing to be told. We were not equals in this fight, not by any measure, but I refused to be a burden either, and by the time the second attacker fell, I felt a strange, fierce pride rising in my chest, despite the fear still coursing through me. "We need to move," Daniel said, already pulling me toward the ventilation access Clara had mentioned. "They'll keep sending more." Clara led the way through the narrow passage, and we emerged into the storage wing, a maze of tall shelves filled with supplies and equipment. Daniel paused here, listening carefully to the sounds echoing through the outpost, sounds of distant fighting, of alarms still blaring, of voices calling out orders in that same flat, cold tone the first intruder had used. "There is something you need to understand," Daniel said quietly, as we moved between the shelves. "The man leading this attack, the one who spoke to us at the house, his name is Victor. He served under the same command as I once did, before everything changed. We were not enemies then. We fought on the same side." "What happened?" I asked. "The operation I told you about, the one that stopped the attack meant to kill thousands. It also ended the career of everyone involved in the plan we stopped, including people Victor cared about. He did not see it as justice. He saw it as betrayal, because some of those people had once been his friends, his mentors, people who convinced him the ends justified whatever means they chose. When I exposed what they were planning, I did not just stop an attack. I destroyed everything Victor believed about his own purpose. So this is not just about revenge," I said slowly, understanding beginning to form. "This is about him proving that everything you did was wrong, that the man he used to trust chose the wrong side." Daniel nodded, his expression heavy with old grief. He has spent years since then convincing himself of that, and people who convince themselves of something like that for long enough will eventually find a way to make it true, whatever the cost. We reached a small maintenance office near the back of the storage wing, and Clara moved to a secondary console built into the wall. "This connects to the same array, through a different pathway," she said. "It's not as strong, but if the direct route is locked, this might still work." Daniel moved to help her, and for a few precious minutes, the room was quiet except for the soft sounds of their work and the distant echoes of the ongoing search happening throughout the outpost. I used the time to ask the questions that had been building inside me since the moment the alarm first sounded. "How many people know who you really are?" I asked. "Very few," Daniel admitted. "The Dominion, your people, they kept extensive records on operatives like me during the war, records that were supposed to be sealed once peace was declared. Somehow, those records were never fully destroyed. I do not know who accessed them or how Victor's people found this outpost, found me, found us, but I suspect someone with access to those old files decided that information was worth selling." "Why would anyone sell information like that?" I asked. "What could they possibly gain?" "Money, protection, favor with someone more powerful," Daniel said, his jaw tightening. "There are always people willing to trade a stranger's safety for something they want badly enough." Clara made a small sound of triumph as the console in front of her lit up fully. "I have a connection. It's weak, but it's active." Daniel moved quickly, sending a compressed signal out through the reopened pathway, a call for support that I hoped, more than I had ever hoped for anything, would reach someone capable of ending this before it grew any worse. "How long until help arrives?" I asked. "If the signal reaches the nearest patrol vessel, perhaps 20 minutes, Daniel said. "If it has to travel further, it could be much longer." 20 minutes felt like an impossibly long time, standing in a small room while armed strangers searched the outpost for us. For him, driven by years of anger and grief, twisted into something dark and unforgiving. "There is something else you should know," Daniel said quietly, glancing at me with an expression I had not seen from him before, something almost like fear, though not fear for himself. "Victor will not simply try to capture me. He believes that ending my life will somehow undo what happened all those years ago. He believes it will prove that his cause was right and mine was wrong. He has waited a long time for this moment, and men like that do not walk away easily, even when the odds turn against them." "Then we make sure the odds turn against him completely," I said, surprising myself again with the steadiness of my own resolve. Daniel studied me for a long moment, something like admiration mixing with the worry still etched across his face. "You continue to surprise me," he said softly. "I thought when we married that I would spend our life together trying to protect a woman who had been sheltered by her position, someone unfamiliar with real danger. I see now how wrong that assumption was." "We were both wrong about each other," I said. "You believed I was fragile. I believed you were forgettable. Perhaps we should agree, from this point forward, to stop assuming we already know everything about the person standing beside us." A faint, genuine smile crossed his face, the first one I had seen since the alarm sounded that morning, brief but real, a small piece of the man I had grown to care for shining through the tension of the moment. "Agreed," he said. "Now, we need a plan, because 20 minutes is a long time to survive against someone who has spent years preparing for exactly this moment." Clara spoke up from the console, her voice tight with worry. "There's something else. I'm picking up movement near the northern storage entrance. At least 4 signatures, moving toward this position." Daniel's expression hardened once more, the softness of a moment ago folding back beneath the focused calm I now understood was not natural stillness but hard-earned discipline. "They know we're here. We need to move again, and this time we need somewhere we can actually hold a position, not just hide." "The observation tower," Clara said. "It's built for defense against storms, reinforced walls, a single entrance that can be sealed from the inside. If you can reach it, you could hold out there until support arrives." "That will have to be our destination then," Daniel said, already moving toward the door. "Clara, you should stay hidden here. There is no reason for you to face this danger alongside us." "I already sent the distress signal," Clara said, a stubborn set to her jaw that reminded me, strangely, of myself in that moment. "I'm not simply going to disappear now and hope it worked." Daniel looked at her, then at me, and something in his expression told me he understood there was no arguing with either of us now, not after everything the morning had already demanded from all 3 of us. "Then we move together," he said, "and we move quickly." We left the storage wing through a side passage, the sounds of pursuit growing steadily closer behind us, and somewhere beneath the fear still gripping my chest, I felt something else beginning to take root, something I had not expected to feel on a day that had started with such ordinary quiet. I felt determination, sharp and clear, a refusal to let the man beside me face this alone, whatever history he carried, whatever secrets he had kept, whatever danger still waited ahead of us in the tower rising against the pale sky. The observation tower stood at the northern edge of the outpost, a tall structure built from thick, reinforced material meant to withstand the fierce storms that sometimes swept across this world without warning. Reaching it meant crossing an open stretch of ground, exposed and dangerous, with nothing to shield us from view except a scattering of storage containers and the fading light of early morning. Daniel led the way, moving low and fast, motioning for Clara and me to follow the exact path he chose, each step placed with a purpose I could not fully understand but trusted completely by this point. Halfway across the open ground, a shout rang out behind us, followed by the sharp sound of weapons fire striking the container nearest to where I had just been standing. "Move," Daniel said, and there was no gentleness in his voice now, only urgency. We reached the base of the tower as more shouts echoed across the open ground, and Daniel worked quickly at the entrance controls, his hands steady despite the chaos surrounding us. The door slid open, and we rushed inside just as another burst of fire struck the wall behind us, close enough that I felt the impact through the ground beneath my feet. Daniel sealed the door the moment we were through, and for a brief, precious moment, the tower fell silent, except for our ragged breathing. "This will hold for a while," Daniel said, moving to a narrow window near the top of the structure. "But not forever. Victor's people will find a way through eventually, especially if they brought the equipment I suspect they did." "How long do we have?" I asked. "Long enough to prepare, I hope," he said. "Clara, is there any way to monitor the signal you sent earlier from this position?" Clara moved to a small console built into the tower's control panel, one clearly meant for monitoring storms rather than tracking rescue signals, but she worked at it anyway, her fingers moving with the same determined focus I had come to admire in her during our short time together. "I can see a faint response," she said after a moment. "Something received the signal. I can't tell how far away they are, or how quickly they can reach us, but someone is coming." Relief flickered through me, brief and fragile, quickly replaced by the reality of our situation. Someone coming did not mean someone arriving in time. Daniel moved through the tower, checking each level, each possible entry point, his expression growing more focused with every passing minute. I followed him, watching him work, seeing glimpses of the man Victor had once known, the operative trained to survive situations exactly like this one. "Tell me about him," I said quietly, as Daniel secured a supply closet near the tower's midpoint, transforming ordinary materials into makeshift barriers with a resourcefulness that spoke of years of practice. "Victor, what was he like before all of this?" Daniel paused, his hands stilling for a moment. He was one of the best people I ever served alongside. Quick thinking, fiercely loyal, willing to put himself between danger and anyone he cared about without a second thought. I considered him a friend for a long time. That is what makes this so difficult. I am not fighting a stranger today. I am fighting someone who once would have died for me, and who now believes I deserve nothing less than the same fate he thinks I dealt to him. "Do you believe that?" I asked. "That you deserve this?" Daniel looked at me, and for a moment, the weight of years seemed to settle fully across his shoulders. I have asked myself that question more times than I can count. What I did stopped an attack that would have killed thousands of innocent people. I know that choice was right, but the people who suffered because of that choice were not always the ones responsible for the plan. Some of them were simply caught in the aftermath, people like Victor, who trusted the wrong leadership and paid a price they never fully deserved. I do not regret stopping the attack. I do regret that stopping it cost people like him everything they had built their lives around. "That is a heavy thing to carry," I said softly. "It is," he agreed. "It is part of why I chose the life I built with you. Quiet mornings, a garden that does not depend on anyone's forgiveness, a wife who I hoped would never need to know how heavy that weight truly was." The sound of movement outside interrupted us before I could respond, and Daniel's attention snapped immediately back to the present danger. Through the narrow window, I could see figures moving across the open ground toward the tower, more of them than before, moving with the coordinated precision of people who had planned for exactly this outcome. "They're bringing everything they have," Daniel said grimly. "Victor knows this may be his only chance." Clara's voice rose from below. "The signal response just changed. Whoever received my message is close now, close enough that their system registered our exact position." "How close?" Daniel asked. "Minutes, not hours," Clara said, relief and fear mixing in her voice in equal measure. "But minutes might not be fast enough if they reach the door before help arrives." Daniel moved to the narrow entrance at the base of the tower, positioning himself where he could see the approaching figures clearly. I moved to stand beside him, refusing once again to be treated as something fragile that needed protecting from a distance. "There is something I need to tell you," Daniel said quietly, his eyes fixed on the approaching danger. "If Victor breaks through, I may need to do things you will not want to see. Things I have spent years trying to leave behind me. I need you to understand, before that happens, that the man doing those things and the man who married you are not two different people. They are the same person, choosing, in this moment, to protect the life we built together, even if the way I protect it looks nothing like the mornings you have grown used to. I reached out and took his hand, steady despite the fear still coursing through my own chest. I already told you, Daniel, everything I have seen of you today, the fighting, the careful planning, the way you protect everyone around you without hesitation, none of it feels like a stranger to me. It feels like the same steady, careful man who has spent 2 years making sure I never once felt unsafe in this house, even when I gave him no reason to try. Something shifted in his expression, gratitude and resolve mixing together into something fierce and determined. He squeezed my hand once, briefly, before releasing it and turning his full attention back to the door. The first impact against the entrance came moments later, a heavy, deliberate strike that rattled the entire structure of the tower. Daniel's posture shifted immediately, settling into that same terrible stillness I had witnessed twice before, a calm that existed only in the space just before violence. "Clara, get to the highest level and stay there," Daniel said. "Whatever happens down here, do not come back down until I call for you." Clara hesitated only a moment before nodding and disappearing up the narrow stairway leading to the tower's upper level. "And you," Daniel said, turning to me, "stay behind the barrier we built, please." I wanted to argue, wanted to insist once more that I would not simply stand aside while danger pressed so close. But something in his expression, a plea buried beneath the calm resolve, made me realize that this was not about doubting my strength. It was about him needing, just this once, to know that I was as safe as he could make me, so that he could face whatever came through that door without dividing his focus. "Be careful," I said instead, moving to the barrier as he asked. The door gave way a moment later, torn from its frame by force I could not fully comprehend, and Victor stepped through the opening, flanked by several of his people, weapons raised, expression cold and unforgiving. "Cole," Victor said, his voice carrying years of buried grief twisted into something sharp and dangerous. "I have waited a very long time for this moment." "Victor," Daniel said, his own voice steady, despite the danger standing directly in front of him. "This does not have to end the way you have planned it in your mind for all these years. Everything ended the day you decided you knew better than the rest of us," Victor said. "The day you decided your judgment mattered more than everything we had built together." "I stopped an attack that would have killed thousands of people," Daniel said. "I would make that same choice again, even knowing everything it cost you." Something in Victor's expression cracked at those words, grief and rage warring openly across his features. "Then you will understand why I have to make this choice too." What followed happened faster than I could fully track, a blur of motion and sound that filled the base of the tower with a tension so thick it felt like something physical pressing against my chest. Daniel moved with a focus I had never witnessed from any person before, meeting each attack with practiced precision, never allowing himself to be overwhelmed despite being outnumbered by Victor's remaining people. I stayed behind the barrier as promised, but I did not stay idle. Each opening I could create, each distraction I could offer without stepping directly into danger, I used, throwing loose equipment, shouting warnings when I saw movement Daniel could not, doing everything within my power to tip the balance even slightly in our favor. The fight moved through the base of the tower, each moment stretching longer than it should have, each strike and counter carrying the weight of years of history between two men who had once called each other friend. Victor fought with a desperation that made him dangerous in ways his training alone could not fully explain, driven by grief that had calcified into something unshakable over the years since the operation that ended his old life. "You could have joined us," Victor said, breathing hard, circling Daniel with careful, measured steps. "You could have understood what we were trying to protect." "What you were trying to protect would have killed thousands of innocent people," Daniel said, his own breathing controlled, despite the exertion evident in his stance. "I could never have joined that, Victor. Not then, not now." "Then we have nothing left to say to each other," Victor said, and launched himself forward in a final, desperate attempt to end the confrontation that had defined so much of his life for so many years. What happened next unfolded in a moment that felt both impossibly fast and painfully slow. Daniel meeting Victor's final attack with a decisive, practiced motion that ended the confrontation cleanly, without the cruelty Victor's actions might have justified, but with a finality that left no question about who had emerged from this moment still standing. Victor fell to the ground, defeated but alive, and Daniel stood over him, chest heaving, expression heavy with an exhaustion that went far deeper than the physical fight that had just ended. "It did not have to end this way," Daniel said quietly, more to himself than to Victor, who lay silent on the ground before him. Outside, the sound of new engines cut through the tense quiet, and moments later, the remaining figures who had accompanied Victor into the tower found themselves surrounded by reinforcements who had finally arrived, drawn by the distress signal Clara had sent what felt like hours ago, though I knew it had only been a fraction of that time. I moved from behind the barrier, crossing the space between us in a few quick steps, and Daniel turned to meet me, relief and exhaustion mixing openly across his features for the first time since the morning had shattered into chaos. "It's over," he said quietly, as if he barely believed the words himself. "For now," I said, glancing toward Victor's still form on the ground, toward the reinforcements moving through the tower's entrance, toward the pale morning light now visible through the broken doorway. "But I do not think this is the last time your past will find its way to our door." Daniel's expression grew thoughtful, the weight of that truth settling over him even amid the relief of the moment. "No," he agreed, "it probably is not, but whatever comes next, I will not face it by hiding who I am from you again. That much I promise." I looked at him, this man I had once dismissed as ordinary, this man who had proven himself capable of things I never could have imagined during our quiet mornings together, and I felt something settle within me, a certainty that had not existed before this day began. "Good," I said, "because I am done underestimating you." The days that followed the attack were unlike anything I had experienced during my 2 years on the outpost. Ships arrived from across the region, carrying officials from both my people and Daniel's, each of them eager to understand exactly what had happened and exactly who Daniel truly was. I watched him answer their questions with the same steady calm he had shown throughout the entire ordeal, giving them the truth without excess, without drama, simply stating facts as if they were the most ordinary thing in the world, even though every person listening seemed to understand they were hearing something extraordinary. Victor was taken into custody, alive but broken in ways that went far deeper than any physical wound. I found myself, in the quiet moments afterward, feeling something unexpected toward him, not forgiveness exactly, but a kind of sorrow for a man who had spent years allowing grief to reshape him into someone capable of the violence we had witnessed. Daniel visited him once, before the officials took him away to face whatever consequences awaited him, and though I did not hear the conversation between them, Daniel returned to me afterward with an expression that told me some old wound had finally, painfully, begun to close. "What did you say to him?" I asked as we walked back toward our house, now surrounded by workers repairing the damage left behind by the attack. "I told him I was sorry," Daniel said, "not for stopping the operation. I will never be sorry for that, but sorry that the cost fell so heavily on people like him, people who trusted leadership that did not deserve that trust. I told him I hoped, someday, he could find a way to build something new, the way I did." "Do you think he will?" I asked. Daniel was quiet for a long moment. "I do not know, but I hope so. Grief that goes unanswered for long enough has a way of hardening into something dangerous. I would rather see him find peace, even now, than spend the rest of his life the way he has spent the last several years." We reached our house, still standing despite the damage around it, the garden Daniel had tended so carefully, somehow untouched by the chaos that had swept through everything surrounding it. He knelt beside it for a moment, checking the soil, the small green shoots pushing up toward the light, and something in the simple, familiar motion eased the tension that had gripped both of us since the alarm first sounded days earlier. "You are still the same man who grows vegetables and burns toast," I said, watching him work, "even after everything I saw you do." He looked up at me, a small, genuine smile crossing his face, the first easy smile I had seen from him since this entire ordeal began. "I told you, that part was never a lie." In the weeks that followed, word of what happened on our small, forgettable outpost spread further than either of us expected. My father's court, which had once sent me here as punishment, now sent messages filled with careful, curious questions about the man they had once dismissed as an insignificant match for their disgraced daughter. Officials who had barely acknowledged Daniel's existence before now spoke of him with a respect bordering on caution, and I found myself, for the first time since my exile began, feeling something other than resentment toward the life I had been given. I was no longer simply the disgraced princess sent away to marry someone forgettable. I had become something else entirely, someone who had stood beside a man capable of extraordinary things and chosen, in the moment that mattered most, to stand with him rather than run from him. One evening, several weeks after the attack, we sat together in our small kitchen, the same room where the alarm had first sounded, where the ordinary morning had shattered so completely into chaos. Daniel had made tea again, still too bitter, still slightly overcooked in whatever strange way he always managed to overcook a simple drink, and I found myself smiling as I drank it, a warmth spreading through me that had nothing to do with the temperature of the cup in my hands. "I have been thinking," I said, "about everything that happened, about who you were before and who you have chosen to be now." "And what have you concluded?" Daniel asked, watching me carefully. "I think my father sent me here believing he was punishing me with someone insignificant," I said. "I think he wanted me to spend my exile feeling forgotten, married to a man the universe would never think twice about. Instead, he gave me someone who chose, deliberately, every single day, to set aside extraordinary power in favor of an ordinary, gentle life. I do not think that is a small thing, Daniel. I think that might be one of the most difficult choices a person could make." Daniel reached across the table and took my hand, his fingers steady, familiar, the same hands that had disabled dangerous machinery, disarmed trained fighters, and yet also planted seeds in soil with such careful patience. "I did not choose this life because I was hiding from what I used to be," he said quietly. "I chose it because I finally understood what I wanted to build instead. A life measured by small, quiet moments rather than dangerous ones. A garden that grows because I tend it, not because I forced it to survive. A marriage built slowly, honestly, even if I made mistakes along the way, in how honest I chose to be at first." "You should have told me sooner," I said, though the anger I once felt about his silence had softened considerably since that first terrifying morning. "I know," he said, "and I am sorry for that. But I am not sorry for who I chose to become after everything I left behind. I am not sorry for choosing you, for choosing this life, even knowing it might one day be interrupted by the past I tried to leave behind." I studied him for a long moment, this man who had once seemed so plain, so unremarkable, so beneath the life I believed I deserved. I saw now how wrong that first impression had been, not because he was secretly dangerous, though he certainly was, but because true strength, I realized, was never about how much power a person carried within them. It was about what they chose to do with that power once they had it. Daniel could have used what he knew, what he had trained for, to build a life defined by fear and control. Instead, he chose gentleness, he chose patience, he chose a garden and bad tea and quiet mornings, deliberately, every single day, even with the knowledge of exactly how much violence he was capable of if the moment ever demanded it. "I used to think my father exiled me to a life of nothing," I said. "I think instead he accidentally gave me something extraordinary, wrapped inside something that looked, at first glance, remarkably ordinary." Daniel smiled, that same small, genuine expression I had come to treasure over the weeks since the attack. "Ordinary was always the goal," he said. I am glad in the end it turned out to be worth choosing. Outside our window, the outpost continued its slow process of repair, workers rebuilding what had been damaged, life gradually settling back into its familiar rhythm. But something had shifted permanently within our small house, within the marriage that had begun as punishment and grown, through crisis and honesty, into something neither of us had expected to find in this quiet corner of the galaxy. I no longer saw Daniel as ordinary, not in the way I once used the word, dismissively, carelessly, without understanding what true stillness and quiet strength could look like when carried by the right kind of person. I saw him now as something far more remarkable, a man who had faced the worst version of his own past and chosen, deliberately and completely, to walk back toward the gentle life he had built instead of losing himself once more to the violence that had once defined him. Word continued to spread across both our peoples in the months that followed, stories shifting and growing with each retelling, until Daniel's name carried a weight neither of us had ever expected it to carry again. But within the walls of our small house, none of that mattered as much as the simple truths we had built together, morning by morning, garden by garden, quiet moment by quiet moment. My father's court, once so quick to dismiss this marriage as a fitting punishment for a disappointing daughter, now sent invitations, requests, careful diplomatic overtures toward the man they had once considered beneath notice. I answered each of them the same way, with quiet pride, rather than the resentment I once carried toward this life. I had been sent here believing I was receiving a punishment. Instead, I had found a partner whose strength ran so deep it required no display, no announcement, no performance for others to witness. It simply existed, quietly, patiently, waiting only to be called upon when the people he loved needed protecting. I thought, that final evening, watching him tend to his garden as the sun set gently over the outpost we now called home together, that I finally understood the truth my father's court had never intended to teach me. The most extraordinary people are rarely the ones who announce their power to the world. They are the ones who choose, every single day, to set that power aside in favor of something gentler, something quieter, something built with patience and care rather than force. Daniel Cole had once been a man capable of ending threats before most people even recognized danger had arrived. Now he was simply my husband, kneeling in the dirt, coaxing small green shoots toward the light, choosing this ordinary, extraordinary life with the same quiet determination he had once brought to a war he never wanted to fight. And for the first time since my exile began, I found myself grateful for exactly the life I had been given, not despite its quiet beginnings, but because of everything those quiet beginnings had turned out to hide, and everything they had ultimately allowed us both to become.